You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about the Hollywood baby snatcher and the 5,000 kidnapped babies who were then adopted by celebrities. A case of mass abduction, a kidnapping ring living in plain sight, families ripped apart and others brought together, all based on lies. One woman who became one of the most prolific serial kidnappers and killers. If you don't know, it is my absolute passion to make these videos, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if that's something that you would like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leave me a nice comment down below. I also want to thank our sponsor, Magellan TV. You guys know that I love this streaming service, but I actually found a documentary that is so important to watch, and that's why I love Magellan, because they have so many just like it that have such knowledgeable things that you can learn about, and also just things that you can get help with. Now, this documentary I watched was actually a 5-episode documentary on bullying, and it's called Bullied, You Were Not Alone. Now, millions of children and young adults are bullied, whether in person or online, and it can cause heartbreaking consequences. Many people have become victims and have lost their lives due to it. But if you need something a little less heavy, there are so many different genres that you can look into. I mean, from space, from nature, there's just so much that you can learn about, which is why I love this service. And they have about 3,000 documentaries to choose from. So if you want to try it, go to try.magellantv.com/Brooke McKenna, and it will give you a free 1-month trial. Now let's get back to the story. So it was the 1920s in Tennessee, and the Tennessee Children's Home Society had branches in Memphis, Jackson, Knoxville, and Chattanooga, and they would charge about $7 to adopt a child from them. The only reason they did so was because of their own fees that they had to, give up some money for, but they had just come under fire for Tennessee law saying that all adoption places could not actually charge for the selling of children, so that wouldn't become something that was, making people a lot of money for horrific things. However, one of their employees decided not to follow this law. Now, in 1924, children began being adopted out of state, which was unusual for this Tennessee Children's Home. This was in New York as well as California and these big cities with wealthy families, but little did they know the children that they were adopting were in need of a family. They had been stolen. Adoption was becoming quite popular during this time because many of these children's homes were placing ads saying that it would reduce divorce, it would control births, and it would fill all the churches and do real missionary work. But the secretive kind of adoption was always around prior to this, ones that would take unmarried mothers and take their children away from them to put into new homes where no one was told that they were adopted, and the families never spoke of it again. Now, the first laws to actually protect adopted children happened in 1851, when it was said that adoption was to not be based off of just adult interests, but the actual welfare of the children. But around the 1920s, many people were getting more vocal about wanting to adopt and having adoptive children because fertility was actually on the decline and would only get worse with the Great Depression. Now, prior to this, women were actually looked down upon and divorced by their husbands for being infertile because childlessness was deemed a disgrace for a woman. However, at this point, it had been researched and found that a lot of the times it was actually low sperm count of the men that were causing these partners to not be able to get pregnant. So then, of course, instead of leaving their wives, men decided to, stay with them and figure out what they could do to actually have a child together. Some of the wealthier families decided to go and try to get the early version of IVF, and when that didn't work, adoption was their next option. And a woman named Georgia Tann knew just how to help. In fact, she marketed the best babies available. This was becoming a selling point for these wealthy families who wanted their babies to be the most superior if they couldn't actually come from their genetics. Hollywood actors, authors, entertainers, and anyone who had enough money to do so were lining up to adopt these children. This is when a baby who was most of the time white with blonde hair and blue eyes was selected for them and handed over. Successful actors like Dick Powell and his wife June Allison, who were, popular during this time, decided to adopt a baby girl and named her Pamela. There was also New York Governor Herbert Lehman, who adopted a child as well, and professional wrestler Ric Flair's parents actually adopted him from this children's home. Actress Joan Crawford ended up adopting 5 children, but 2 of which, her twins Kathy and Cindy, were adopted from Georgia. Now, when I say Georgia, I mean the woman and not the actual place. None of this happened in Georgia. So Georgia is the name of the woman who helped with all of these adoptions. But the problem was, at least in New York, there was a law banning adoptive children to be able to see their birth certificates. Now, do you remember one of the adoptive parents, Governor Herbert Lehman, that I told you adopted this child? Well, he was actually the one who was the governor at the time to sign in this law into effect. No one knew where these babies were coming from. No one but Georgia Tann. At the same time in Tennessee, babies were disappearing from their yards, from walking home from school, from playing at another friend's house, and they would never return home. This woman, Georgia, who appeared to be this loving, sweet grandmother figure, was loved by everyone. She had short gray hair with round glasses and an all but inviting look. She actually had a very stern look, but it made many people respect her because she did deal with children who were sometimes misbehaving. She was actually invited to the inauguration of President Truman by the prior First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. And everyone believed, as the executive secretary of this Tennessee Children's Home Society, she was changing the lives of so many families forever. She claimed that her adoptive children turned out better due to the selective process of poor children being put into and made into a higher type, given access to these more rich homes where they could better flourish. She was the spokesperson for adoption during this time and made many decide that that was the route that they were going to take. However, many had no idea about the sinister things that she was doing to get these children. Around 30 years later, in 1950, the new governor shut down the Tennessee Children's Home Society. He had launched an investigation after hearing reports of possible child trafficking from this home. Now, a social worker named Ann Bills had noticed that Memphis, this area, had one of the highest rates of infant mortality, which was strange to her considering they had so many infants being saved and then adopted out by better families. Georgia didn't have a hold on this new Governor Gordon Brown, and they were going to take her down, and it was believed that Georgia had made up to $1 million selling around 5,000 children. A few victims then came forward, and this was actually published, their accounts, in a story by Lisa Wingate, and this was called Before We Were Yours. Many of them came forward saying that they remembered a few times that they had met with Georgia, they remembered some of their childhood, and they wanted to tell people about it. A woman named Rose Harvey was actually pregnant at the time, and she also had a 2-year-old son named Onyx. She said that that is when a woman showed up at her door, and she was a poor single mother who had diabetes and was struggling to take care of her children, but she was doing everything she could. And that is when this woman handed her papers saying that her husband, the boy's father, had betrayed her and had signed over custody, saying that Rose was an unfit mother. Onyx was then taken and placed into an adoptive family. A girl named Sally Brandon was only 3 years old when she and her 2 brothers were dropped off at the courthouse on the steps because their mother could no longer take care of them. So they were just going to go into, the system to try to find them homes. And she didn't really have a plan. She just dropped them off there. However, that is when a limo pulled up and took the children in. They were taken to Memphis and then they were separated, and Georgia really took a liking to Sally and began taking her to parties, letting her out and about, and making her dress up to meet these adults. She remembered she would go to these parties with a whole bunch of children, and some of them would just never return. Another victim named Teresa Jennings said that her parents ended up adopting her, but they almost didn't, and she almost died at the hands of the Tennessee Children's Home. You see, they were handed a perfectly healthy baby boy to take home, and yet they were hearing some crying from the room. So they asked what it was. Georgia was saying, oh, don't worry about it. But they decided to go over to this crib and they found baby Teresa. She was covered in a rash. It was like her tongue was tied to the bottom of her mouth. She was obviously suffering and not too far from passing away. Her parents decided to take her instead, and they immediately took her to the doctors, where they found out that she was actually allergic to dairy. And so when they began giving her goat milk instead, she completely healed and was fine. But she believes that she was left in that crib to die, and if it wasn't for her parents, she wouldn't still be alive today. But there was also a woman named Norma Sue who had vanished from her home along with her 5 siblings. They were all playing outside in a poor area where they lived in this little shack, and when Norma was 8, a limo pulled up and told them all to get inside. They were then dropped off at different locations, and Norma and her twin sister were then adopted out. Her new parents were saying, we're your new mommy and daddy, and when they would tell them, no, you're not, we have a mommy and daddy, they would say, oh no, you're with us now, we're your family. And they were so confused, but Georgia didn't explain anything to them, and she also told them that they were only 6 when they were 8. Another victim actually said that they were adopted by a family, but they were also close to the kids who were adopted by a family down the street. However, a little while later, those kids were sent back because the family did not want them anymore, and so they were then placed in a different home or back in the children's home, while new children were given to the family. There was then another 8-month-old baby who had an unmarried mother who was having a very hard time with money, and that is when Georgia was alerted and went to find this baby who was in great condition, and that is when the baby was kidnapped and adopted out. Twins James and Thomas White were only 5 years old when they were kidnapped. They said that their older sister, who was watching them, went down the street to a friend's house for a few seconds while they were napping at home, and that is when they were actually taken from the inside of their own home. They said that they were taken by Georgia, and they actually were lured many different places with her. She would take them everywhere with her, and then they were sold to a family in Hollywood who ended up abusing them. And so at the age of 7, 2 years later, they ran away, and they were found by another family with bruises, and that's when, of course, everybody got involved, and they were sent back to the children's home. They said that they were a little older this time, and they began to be sexually abused.
5 years of age, we were taking a nap, and my oldest sister, which was at 13 at the time, she had left the house and went down the street to visit our grandmother. And while we were napping, these people came in and took us out of the bed. We were still in bed.
Wow. And do you remember what happened then? Where were you taken?
Well, we was taken to Memphis, Tennessee, at the age of 5, and into the Tennessee Children's Home with Georgia Tann. We don't know exactly how long we were at the Tennessee Children's Family Home, but we spent a lot of time with Georgia Tann. She would take us places, me and my twin brother. So we have figured out that we had lived with Georgia Tann, quite a few times, for a long time. And then after that, she had, of course, now we don't have proof that she sold us, that she got money, but then she sold us to a couple out in California, out in Hollywood.
A woman named Joy Barner had been kidnapped and adopted into another family who had paid $500 for her and would constantly remind her of that. They would say that they could have gotten a good hunting dog for less, and that she was from the lowest scum on earth. Debbie Ayler was kidnapped when she was only 6 weeks old because her mother was still in the hospital, and she was told by Georgia that her baby had actually passed away. However, Debbie was sick, and Georgia had to nurse her back to health in the back of her limo before giving her to a different family. Alma Sipple handed over her toddler to a woman at her front door, and this was for a hospital checkup that she couldn't pay for, but the woman said she would do it for her, and she never saw her daughter again. This woman had come to her door saying that she was investigating a child abuse claim that was next door, but she had, saw the baby at her house and just, wanted to see if everything was okay. And then she noticed that the baby named Irma was actually struggling to breathe with a runny nose. And so she said, maybe you should take the baby for the checkup. And that's when Alma said, I don't have enough money to at this time. But the woman, Georgia, said, oh, I could do that for you. She then had to sign a paper and was told she couldn't go with her. And when she went to the hospital the next day to pick up Irma, she was told that her child couldn't be there because the only children there belonged to the Tennessee Children's Home. She watched her little girl jumping up and down on her bed right through the glass and could do nothing to get to her. A few days later, the woman called her back up saying that Irma had actually died of pneumonia. She then said that they actually buried Irma in a grave but never gave the address, and Alma began looking everywhere but could not find a gravesite for her child. And every time she called the children's home, she was told that nobody could talk to her. Nobody had any information to give her. 44 years later, Alma saw that very face of the woman who took her child that day. This was on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. This was about Georgia Tann and what she had been doing all of those years, and she screamed when she showed up on the screen and told her husband, that is the woman who took my child. This episode had been created to connect birth parents and their stolen children, and for Alma and her daughter, they actually did get to meet, and it was a happy reunion with a phone call where they were both equally as nervous and excited. But 600 different calls were placed just because of this Unsolved Mysteries episode of victims believing that they were either stolen babies or parents who had their children stolen from them. A site was put together to further help the victims put their families back together, but it turned out that Georgia's work with children began long before anybody could have ever believed. When she was a child herself, her father was a very prominent judge, and he would always bring home very neglected and abandoned children, basically rehome them into different places. And Georgia was always a huge part of this, and so when she went to college, she did study music, but she did also focus on social work. She also was studying law, and she actually passed her bar exam to become a lawyer, but was told by her father that it wasn't a woman's job and she needed to practice social work. There was then a children's home in Mississippi that she was hired at as a receiving director, and there she would adopt a child of her own named June. However, June would later say that her mother was not a very caring woman. She was like a cold fish who gave her only material things and nothing else. Soon after working at this children's home in Mississippi, she was fired due to her strange methods of finding homes for these children. Of course, not much was said, and she wasn't officially barred from working in social work. So she moved with her girlfriend, who is named Ann Atwood, to Tennessee. And there she actually adopted Anne because a lot of the times during this time for same-sex couples to be able to, own property together and inherit one another's things, they would have to adopt one another. And this is where Georgia actually used her father's connections as a judge in order for her to get a job at this different children's home in Tennessee, in this other state where they didn't know that she had been fired or why she had been fired. That's when she began charging outrageous amounts of money for out-of-state private adoptions, something that the children's clinic didn't normally do. These white, blonde, blue-eyed babies were being sold for about $14,000 to these wealthy individuals. But all of this wouldn't have been possible with Georgia Tann just doing it all on her own. In fact, she had a whole network of corrupt people on her payroll. Social workers as well as nurses were being paid to look out for babies that could be sold for high amounts. They were to, get them from mothers who were groggy on their medication and would just sign everything. And they would tell these mothers that their baby either had been born deceased or had passed away. And the social workers would tell parents that already knew that their child was healthy and was home that they were unfit parents and they were having to take these children away. They would then help Georgia kidnap these children and adopt them out to completely different families, basically putting them up on the black market. Social workers would pretend to investigate these homes with children in it and make it appear that they were doing a horrible job in order for the kidnapping to be covered up as parents just being unable to look after their own children. Georgia actually had 2 assistants who were coming with her all of the time. They would make trips monthly with about 4 to 6 babies with them, and they would rent hotels in the area and meet with all of the adopted parents who would make out a check to Georgia and then would basically take the baby and go. All of this money was put into a false corporation named bank account. To make all of this appear legal though, Georgia had a governor under her belt. That was Governor E.H. Crump, and also the family court judge Camille Kelly on her team. Doctors, lawyers, and police officers were all in on this, making it super easy to take these children in broad daylight. If any family tried to fight back, they were often too poor to do so or would be told by these powerhouses that they must be mistaken, and they were told to go home. Spotters were everywhere for Georgia looking for the best babies to abduct, and then Georgia would be informed when they were alone, and that's when she would pull up in her enticing limo with ice cream to lure them in. Sometimes they would make false claims against families saying that they needed welfare assistance, and so Judge Kelly would say, okay, then we need to go and pick up the child and bring it into another family's custody. So a sheriff would go and pick them up, and Georgia would take them away. Meanwhile, the children who hadn't been adopted and were just sitting inside of the children's home were often drugged to keep them quiet. They were also malnourished, and the older children were forced to take care of the younger. They were often taken care of by drug addicts and pedophiles watching over them, and they were put in dark closets and beaten and sexually assaulted. Parents wanting to adopt would even find ads in the newspapers selling these babies with a tagline like, "They'd like to be your Christmas gift." 30 babies were even raffled off every year for Christmas, and when these adoptive parents would ask questions, Georgia was ready with the backstories of what had happened to them and that they were from good homes with intelligent, attractive parents who were doctors. But even the adoptive parents weren't free of Georgia's horrific ways. If they asked too many questions or didn't make payments on time, she would blackmail them into giving them more money or even threatening to repossess the child like it was a car. The worst part was that many of these children never actually made it to a home and they weren't given proper care. It's unknown how many actually died at the care of the children's home in Georgia Tann, but it was said that the doctors working for her told her to stop bringing in babies because they were dropping like flies. If a baby appeared to be too weak, they would leave them out in the sun to die, and if they became too old or ugly, they would be gotten rid of. Many cremations were done for the lack of evidence that it would leave behind, and so unsolved murders and disappearances are highly likely in this case. And the worst part is, no one was ever jailed for what they did. Even though the children's home was shut down on September 12th of 1950, Georgia Tann was never arrested for her involvement because she actually died 3 days after due to untreated uterine cancer that put her into a coma. She died at her home at 91 Stonewall Street on September 15th at 59 years old. Judge Kelly was forced to resign and everybody got to work rehoming these children that Georgia had stolen. There was then a memorial placed at Elwood Cemetery that reads, "In memory of all of the hundreds who died under the cold, hard hand of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. Their final resting place unknown, their final peace a blessing." In 1979, Tennessee began requiring that adoptive children could be assisted and would have to be assisted in helping to find their siblings and their parents. However, the birth parents could not go in and try to find them. In 1996, adoption records in Tennessee could be released to adopted adults if they had permission from their birth parents. However, many of the victims also were in New York at this time. And finally, in 2019, Governor Andrew Cuomo allowed adoptive adults to be able to find the birth records. Many victims of Georgia Tann have now reunited with their birth family and have learned so much more about where they came from, what happened, and if they were really truly kidnapped. Many had longed to know more, and they had this hole in their heart that they feared would never go away. Now, victim Norma Sue's daughter has said, "I feel rather strongly that people should know this doesn't stop with the victims. The story goes on and remains in the DNA of the generations." And that is very true. The trauma that comes from adoption, even when the adoptive family is a loving, caring home, can still be crippling and lingers forever, especially when a system is so corrupt. It is believed that these adoptive parents had no idea what was going on or where their adoptive children were really coming from, because Georgia didn't care who she was giving these children to as long as she could give them to as many people as possible. It was said that many adoptive parents during this time who wanted a child were being denied because they were around 40s and 50s, and so they were said to be too old, so they had to go through means of private adoption, which only really the wealthy people could afford. The worst part is, it appears as though adoption was ultimately created for horrific purposes, but many of the horrendous parts of this case haven't changed. Judges and social workers still place these children in homes without the best interest of the child being looked at. They throw them from home to home, being ripped away from their birth parents and being placed in different places where they can never attach, which ultimately leads to attachment issues, and they are not treated through therapy. And even often if they are, RAD, reactive attachment disorder, is not even well known enough to give them proper treatment. This creates even more trauma through different generations for not only the adoptive children, but for the adoptive families. This adoption scandal may have ended, but the corruption in adoption and foster care remains. As you guys know, I have a very close relation to the adoption system, the foster care system, and so this one was very important for me to talk about, to give you kind of a history of adoption and to show that even with the people with the best interests at heart, you know, these adoptive parents who just wanted to have children, there can still be so much darkness happening, and it really does appear that all of this was dark from the very beginning. The mistreatment of the children is still something that needs to be changed, and we have a long way to go with that. So yeah, I don't know what you were expecting with the Hollywood baby snatcher. It's not a typical true crime case. I mean, I love the case of Bobby Joe Stinnett. If you want me to cover that, let me know. I know a few people have already covered it, so I didn't know if I should, but when I found this one, I was like, oh, that's perfect, because it's a mix between the two of, you know, a true crime case and adoption, which is, you know, my two biggest passions, and I feel so thankful that I am able to talk about them on this channel. So yeah, I'd love to hear anything more you know about the history of adoption. I'd love to hear what you think about this case. Do you think there are children out there who still have no idea that they were actually adopted? I think that's a pretty likely theory, unfortunately. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Remember that I have the videos up on the screen if you want to watch some more of my videos. I have so many of them. This is last week's video, and this is a playlist of a whole bunch of my videos. If you want to subscribe to this channel, make sure to click right here. If you want to subscribe to my vlog channel, click right here. Okay, bye.